Why dashboards? Why reporting? A couple of high-level reasons for that. I want to start off on the right-hand side, and that's just because this is a really easy step to take, right? We'll talk today about some of the sources, some of the capacity for dashboarding and reporting in regards to these two separate tools. But to be able to take that first step is very simple. Um, we talk about this a lot of times with customers, and there's really a couple of areas that customers can be in when it comes to reporting already today, their current state. Maybe they're relatively new to a CLM or a CPQ solution. They've been very focused on the end user experience. They've been very focused on making sure that we have a clean process in place. But they haven't really matured or evolved to the point of gathering the data, uncovering the data, and analyzing the data to make decisions based off of that, right? Or maybe we have a solution that's been in place for a little while and we've begun capturing some of that data and reporting on it, but we're looking for more. And that's really the nice offering and the nice output of what we're talking about today is that this can be an answer for either of those scenarios. This can be a really great starting off point if you haven't really started to consider reporting and dashboarding in your use case. But it can also be a source of inspiration or maybe kind of that sparked where you've been reporting on the same couple of different data points for a long time, but you're looking for something else. So we'll talk about some examples or some topics to consider when it comes to reporting in just a little while. In addition to that, some other value around reporting is the ability to target some of those data points that are going to be valuable to the business, right? What can we do to get additional visibility into the outcomes of using this tool? Anecdotally, you might know from your end users that this is better, right? You might hear from them, man, this is so much easier than before. I can generate a contract document with a click of a button, or I can generate a quote document with the click of a button. Or I've been able to gather all of this into one system. I'm not going from tool to tool to get the data pieces that I need or the components that I need to move to the next step. So you might hear some of those stories, but at the end of the day, that's not the measurement, right? And just like the Rockefeller study uncovered, we need to have some data points to be able to ensure things get funded and things get the attention that it does. So the data behind the system allows us to tell those stories with numbers. We're able to utilize this reporting and this dashboarding to measure that performance and monitor that in real time, and then also to use that to be able to report back to leadership to either show areas that could use some improvement and some attention as we look to enhance things, or even to validate the value that we have in our solution already and the benefit, the performance that it's providing to us in the business on the day-to-day. All right, so what does this look like from maybe the technical perspective? What are some of our options when it comes to reports? For both our CLM and our CPQ solutions, there are two main sources for reporting today. Depending on what version of the tool you're on, hopefully you're on one of the later versions of CPQ or CLM, you might have some reports that are already available out of the box. So if you go to your reports tab or your dashboards tab, you might see some canned reports that come with the product. In addition to that, we've got an installed package that we offer that's available for free for either of those solutions. We'll talk about the specific details about getting that installed package up and running in just a minute. But we do have an additional package that you can install into your Salesforce org that provides additional reporting out of the box, if you will. And that's going to come in the form of one dashboard, and it's going to contain a variety of different reports that have been pre-built. That, again, like I said before, you can use as a starting off point. And we'll take a closer look into examples of what that looks like, the contents of that installed package, and then kind of just some know-how, some FAQs around utilizing that. But first, let's start off with how do we access these? Obviously, if you've got the later version of the tool and you've got access to those built-in reports, they're already there. There's no action that's needed on your side other than obviously visibility into the reports within Salesforce. The installed package does require an additional step. So You need to install this package on either CLM or CPQ, and then again in either production or sandbox to get access to that. We'll drop the links here in the chat in case you want to be able to copy those or you want to go ahead and action on that and get those up and running yourselves. But it isn't a separate installed package to install in your environment that will then add an additional dashboard to your environment that contains those reports. And like I said, we'll take a look at that in just a minute. So if you're curious, what is this going to contain or what is this going to have in terms of an impact to my environment? Very minimal. There's just a small handful of reports that each of them contain in them. Very simple to get up and running. One quick disclaimer is that since this is a separate installed package, it's not technically a formal part of the product. So just in case you run into any issues or anything with the actual installed package that you've got up and running, it's outside of scope for our support team. But as we'll learn in just a couple of minutes, the contents are just really strictly Salesforce reports. So most of the time, our customers will have access to a resource that's going to be comfortable with Salesforce reporting to be able to troubleshoot and maintain those as needed. All right, so we've installed these installed packages in our environment. What are some gotchas? What are some things to know about the contents and what we've got at our disposal now? First and foremost, I think that it's important to call out that we've been talking about reporting and dashboarding for a couple of minutes now, and in reality, from the technical perspective, the Conga solution is just leveraging the underlying platform tools that are available to us in Salesforce.com. So when we talk about reporting and dashboarding, there are some pieces of functionality that are available to us in the Conga world because of our product, but the actual reporting platform itself is just utilizing standard Salesforce reports and dashboards. So what does that mean? That means that as a customer, you have the capacity to be able to build and customize any report or dashboard you'd like, right? Whenever you think about what we're doing and the value that we're getting out of this, the data that we're analyzing or that we have the ability to analyze is coming from Conga. The reporting structure and the capacity is coming from Salesforce. So these installed packages are just going to be providing you with pre-created, if you will, Salesforce reports. But from there, those can be deleted, modified, edited, to your heart's content. So when it comes to modifying or maybe even creating additional ones, maybe you see one that you like, but you want one that's different in scope or different in filtering, you'll need to have some level of comfort with creating and customizing Salesforce reports. So I've included a quick link here for some trailhead information in Salesforce. There's a lot of really good training resources that Salesforce provides when it comes to learning more about reporting and dashboards and how to use those. And most of the time, it's a simple, low-level learning experience to be able to get the know-how to be able to manipulate the reports that we're providing. They're pretty straightforward. Additionally, like I said before, you can use these as kind of like a template or a consideration point. There's going to be some manipulation that's probably going to be required for most customers just because of the difference in how everybody's using the tool, but a really good starting off point nonetheless. Another really good topic to cover here is, I've installed the package, I've got it up and running, I'm using the solution already. Why don't I have some data here already? Why am I seeing some blanks or some gaps in my charts whenever I'm looking at them? Couple of different reasons here. First and foremost could just be a permissions issue, right? Just like with everything else Conga, our permissions are going to be honoring the underlying Salesforce permissions. So that should be the first thing that you check there. And then there's a couple of other different reasons why you might not be seeing any data populate. One of them might be that the fields that have been configured in the report aren't currently being used. So if our report is looking at something like total contract value, a custom field on the agreement object, and you aren't using that today, you're reporting on the value of your contract in another way. The reports that are going to be looking at that field are going to show up empty, right? So that's what I had alluded to earlier in terms of customizing those reports. There may need to be some tweaking done to make sure that the reports that are provided align with how you're using the tool and the underlying architecture of the solution today. Another really common reason why something might not be populating is that functionality isn't being utilized today, right? So if we're looking at the amount of times that we're sending something out for approval in regards to our CPQ process, and we're not using that process today in Conga, then you're not going to have any data in place. Or if we're looking at managed clause changes or revisions over time, and we're not using the clause library today, then you're not going to have any data there, right? So that could be another really great benefit to the reporting topic, is that you're looking at some options for reporting and you're seeing some areas or some gaps that you might have in your process today. If you're looking at a report that shows how many times a clause has been revised over its history, and that's of interest to you, or maybe that's of interest to the business to track, and we're not currently using a clause library today, that might be a really good next step to plan for in calendar year 2024, is building out a clause library so that we can begin tracking and reporting on that data. So those are really the most common reasons why a chart or something in the report might not be populating. A couple other ones, but those are probably the most common ones that you'll come across. All right, so we've got the installed package. We've got those out-of-the-box reports. Two separate sources for reporting, but at the end of the day, think of them as just one repository for a starting off point for reporting. From there, do with them what you will. There's a lot of different directions that you can go in. We'll talk about some different dashboards that you can create based off of personas that are using the solution, and then ultimately being able to access that data or surface that data to the appropriate personas. But I wanted to talk about a couple of, maybe more commonly utilized KPIs or metrics that are really important for folks to track based off of the two solutions. And you'll see that these are ones that are included in the dashboards that we provide as well in the installed package. So let's start off with one on the CLM side. Whenever I talk about reporting to a CLM customer, I always make sure that I include the concept of cycle time reporting. This is a really valuable metric to track when it comes to looking at your overall CLM solution. This is also something that you're able to leverage because of your Conga product. So we mentioned before how the reporting offering that we have is utilizing standard Salesforce reports, but the data that you're analyzing comes from Conga, and this is a great example of that. If you're utilizing CLM in best practice, then you've got access to tracking the amount of time that it takes to move through the life cycle of a contract. And I think that this is one of the most valuable metrics for our customers, because I think that unequivocally and across the board, most people can assume that time equals money, right? So if we can report on time, and if we can either report on time saved or identify areas where time is being spent unnecessarily, we can quickly equate that to dollars. So cycle time reporting gives you a really great way to be able to drill down into areas that are showing improvement over time. If we can see that the contract generation phase is taking less and less time as the months and the quarters go by, that's a great area to highlight whenever we're reporting up to our leadership, right? Thanks to generating contracts with Conga, we are saving this many hours per month in our contracts. But additionally, this can also highlight bottlenecks in our process, right? If very commonly we spend the most time during during the negotiation phase for CLM, then we can use this data point as a way to validate that and then take steps to be able to rectify that, right? So what are some things that we can do to improve the process for our negotiation stage? How do we save time in that? In addition to that, we've got a lot of different ways to be able to group that. So if we want to look at this by agreement type, or maybe region, or maybe quarter, again, the breadth and depth of the ability and reporting is available to you from the Salesforce perspective. You can slice and dice this data however you need to look at it in the way that it makes most sense to your business. So cycle time reporting is probably the MVP in the CLM world for reporting. One that I wanted to highlight on the CPQ side, I think, is really important regarding discounting. Again, it's really easy to be able to justify in somebody's mind what it takes to save some money. Time equals money. Here's a really great way to be able to see that in numbers, right? CPQ allows us the ability to track our discounting on different quarters, across different quote types, again, slice that however you'd like to. But this gives you the ability to find any rogue discounting or any areas that might have additional discounting that you didn't anticipate, and then be able to control that, right? Again, all of this is focused around the ability to surface data and analyze data to be able to inform business decisions. So we look at this example, we see that in Q3 of this year, we've got a higher discounting percentage than we usually have. That gives us an opportunity to drill down into that, take a closer look at the story behind and figure out the why, and then act off of that, allowing data to drive our actions and our decisions. So just a couple of high-level options here. There's plenty of other metrics that you can track between the CLM and the CPQ solutions. Ultimately, and this is what we talk about with customers all the time, your business is going to dictate this, right? If anything, this is a really great conversation to have with your leadership to be able to identify the metrics that are important to you. If you're sitting here today and you're sitting in an operations role and your job is to increase efficiency in these solutions, to be able to maximize ROI and show value to your leadership as to why these solutions are working well, then this should be music to your ears, right? We've got the ability to be able to report on this data and then export that so that you can easily show that to your leadership team. All right, so let's take a closer look at this live, be able to see what this looks like in an environment so that you've been exposed to a little bit if you haven't already, and then be able to kind of know how to take those next steps as appropriate. So let me pull up Salesforce. Righty. So once you've installed these are two separate installed packages. I've installed both CPQ and CLM in this environment. You can see that they'll be added to your dashboards tab. So you can access this from a variety of different apps in Salesforce. I'm in CLM today, but you could be in CPQ, have the dashboards tab, and you see that they exist as separate dashboards. So each of those installed packages provide you with one dashboard, and each of them contain about a dozen or so reports within them. We'll take a look at those individually. But I also wanted to call out what you can do with this beyond here, right? That other source of reporting, the reports that come with the later versions of CLM and CPQ, have some of these similar reports breaking out based off of persona. So you can see a couple of examples of that down below, maybe specifically for a CLM persona, based off of what role they play in the life cycle and that overall process. Different data points are going to be more or less valuable to them and have different levels of priority. So you can break this out to just a general legal performance. You want to highlight certain data points or certain charts for an executive persona who's coming in to check on this maybe on a quarterly basis or wants this to be scheduled for them. Or you can also show this for maybe a contract manager or a team leader role who's governing the use of the solution for their direct reports, right? Maybe they're looking at all of their different contract managers who report to them and see the performance over time. So just a really great best practice around designing dashboards for use by different personas by making sure that you're surfacing up the data points that are valuable to each person whenever they're looking at these. All right, so let's take a look at the actual dashboards themselves. Don't want to spend too much time getting too deep and into the weeds here, but I did want to just showcase how consumable this can be from an end user's perspective. All that I've done here is I've installed the CPQ dashboard, and you can see here that I'm already populating this based off of the data in my environment. I've got a lot of different reports that are designed to look at the different data points across the quotes. I had called out already the discount amount, so I can see some information around discounting in this environment. I can see the different win rates. So if I'm tracking how commonly my opportunities with these quotes are closed lost or closed won, I can see that over time. And then I can also see some information around the actual commercials here, right? What are my deal sizes over time or across different regions or across different calendar years? The beauty about Salesforce reports is that I can group and filter these based off of a variety of different data points. So whatever makes most sense to your business, whatever makes most sense to your department, you can customize these as you see fit. From here, from the dashboard, I can configure this dashboard to add or remove the different components on here as I need to. Each of the components on here, if you're not familiar with dashboarding already, each of them are a separate report in and of themselves. So I can click into any of these reports, drill down into the report itself. That kind of blows up the findings so that I can see that at a much higher level. And that also shows me any of the records or any of the results that meet the criteria for this result. So this gives me the ability to take a closer look into this specific one. So if my leadership has come to me and tasked me to look into win rates across different industries, I can now do that with one click. I've moved from my dashboard into this specific report. From here, if we're just starting off with this package and we need to make sure that we're customizing this or we're configuring this so that it meets our needs, I can go right into editing this report on the back end. So again, that allows me to make sure that I'm pulling in the appropriate fields that I need, that I've got the filters configured to meet the scope that I need, and ultimately building this out so that it's built the way that I need it to be built. So if I flip back to the overall dashboard, again, I can add additional components to this. So if I'm looking at these reports and I say, hey, this is a great idea to track on my deal size, but I also want to track on this for across different teams, right? I want to see how my East team is doing compared to my North team, compared to my West team. I could build a separate report with a different structure to it, a different filter set, and then add that as a component to this dashboard, right? Or from here, I can work off of this dashboard and I can create separate ones for those different personas like I called out a couple of minutes ago. All right. And then flipping over to the CLM one, you'll see this is very similar to the CPQ one. Again, dashboard that contains a set of pre-built reports to it. We've talked already about the cycle time reporting. So you see here that I've got duration being calculated and reported on across a couple of these different tiles here, how long it's taking these different contracts to move through either the entire life cycle from request to activation or specific segments of that life cycle as well. I can take a look at things at a high level. How many agreements do I have across my environment and what stages are they in? What are the commercials impacting these agreements, right? Maybe we're looking at this from the downstream perspective. Now we moved into the CLM portion, maybe from our CPQ, and we want to see what we're talking about from a value perspective. Here's a really good example of why we might have a chart without any data in it, right? We talked about that in our FAQ section earlier. This report is looking at agreements that are expiring in the next 3 months or the next 90 days. And in this environment, I have none that are coming up for expiration in the next 90 days, right? So just another example of why there might not be data in here. This might not be a data issue. This may not be any problem, an underlying problem with the report itself. It could just be that you have no data that meets the criteria that you've defined here, right? Finally, I can look at some information around the active agreements that I've got in my environment. A lot of times whenever we're talking about or thinking about the CLM solution, we're really focused on getting something to activated. What does the process look like from the request through the negotiation process, through e-signature and getting it activated? It's sometimes easy to lose sight of that beyond activation. And this is a great way to keep an eye on that, right? We can take a look at the data in our system, our agreements in our environment that are already activated that we now need to maintain moving forward. And then finally, for anybody who maybe sits in a little bit more of a legal ops persona or a legal role on the call today, we've got some information or we got some reports that are able to look specifically into clauses and legal language changes. So one of the really valuable benefits of using the CLM to its full capacity is being able to track changes in legal language over time, right? So we've got the ability to take a look at clauses in our agreements and see how commonly they're modified, see how commonly they're added. And again, all of this data is available to you to drive action. So if we're taking a look at our warranties clause and we see that in our NDA agreement type, we're adding that on a regular basis, that's something for us to consider maybe adding by default at the beginning of the process. Let's consider adding the warranties clause to our template so that now our end users don't have to take the step to add it manually. And maybe that's something that doesn't happen regularly, but it happens enough to take that step, and we wouldn't have known about that otherwise. So a really great way to be able to track things at a high level and then be able to action off of them or take next steps. All right, so that was just a quick foray into the installed packages that we offer. Like I said, those reports that are provided in the product themselves They are available in those different dashboards. They're already broken out by persona type. At the end of the day, my advice to you is to use this as a starting off point. And I've mentioned this a couple of different times. Regardless of your maturity in reporting and dashboarding already today, this is a really great resource to use to either add to that or to start taking the first steps into reporting to really visualize and understand the value that you're gaining from using the solution and be able to help identify areas for enhancements and to make things a little bit better moving forward.